Welcome to part 4 of Let's Play Pokémon FireRed, and... Do you smell that? It smells like dipshit! So I hope you went to the Pokémon Center before coming here, because the rival battles are some of the more difficult battles in this game. Rivals in the Pokémon games also have a tendency to show up at the most inconvenient of times. In fact, Senior Dipshit over here is one of the least annoying rivals in that regard. But hey, it seems he evolved this Pidgey into a Pidgeotto. However, he's still a normal flying type, so Thundershock. Next to electric attacks, flying types are also weak to rock attacks and ice type attacks. And if it makes you easier to remember, I can think of some sort of bullshit reasons why that's the case. Let's see, it's not a good idea for a bird to fly close to thunderclouds. Birds don't really like cold weather, so that's why they always fly away from it. And I guess throwing a rock at a bird would be pretty effective. Also, they are resistant to grass type attacks, bug type attacks and fighting type attacks. Because, well, have you ever tried to chase a bird down to punch it? It's pretty much impossible. Also, they are completely immune to ground type attacks. Because, well, they fly, they don't really have to touch the ground. A good peck to the face still killed it, however. But that's not the only new Pokemon he has on its team. I think pretty much every Pokemon he has on its team right now is something we haven't seen before. The next one he's about to send out is Abra. And Abra is someone you can catch pretty close by. You just go over the bridge we're standing in front of right now, and then you go to the left and there will be patches of grass where you can catch this thing. However, it's only a 15% chance. However, that's not all. The only move Abra knows at this point is Teleport, which is a move that when you use it, it ends a random battle. However, it doesn't work during a trainer battle, so easy picking, right? Well, let's just say this thing's gonna be the bane of my fucking existence later on. It's a psychic type, which, especially in the first generation, is extremely useful. But since it doesn't have any attacking moves, the only way you're gonna train this Pokemon is by sending it out in battle and then switching it out for another Pokemon, because unless the Pokemon faints, if it was involved in battle, even though it didn't defeat the Pokemon itself, it will still get part of the experience. There also is another way to level up Pokemon that don't have any attacks, but we're gonna see that in the next part. So in the meantime, Psychic types are weak to Bug type attacks, Dark type attacks and Ghost type attacks, and they're resistant to Psychic type attacks and Fighting type attacks. However, in the original Generation 1, Psychic types were actually resistant to Ghost type moves, as opposed to being weak to it. And if you remember correctly, Dark type didn't exist in Generation 1, so that means the only thing you have left to attack them with is Bug type attacks, and there are very few actually useful Bug type attacks. In Generation 1 at least. The only thing you had left to attack it with is Pin Missile, which is kind of useful, but then you would really need to have Pin Missile. So Psychic types in Generation 1 were just extremely overpowered, and there was actually another thing. You know how I mentioned that there are special attack stats and special defense stats? In the original Generation 1 there was just one special stat. I'm not entirely sure how it was calculated, so I'm not sure why it also made Psychic types even more overpowered, but they still were really overpowered, even though I don't know exactly how they were. But anyway, that's why to balance out Psychic types in Generation 2, they created Dark types, they make Psychic types weak to Ghost type moves, and they split the special stat into Special Attack and Special Defense. And hey look, Venom is evolving! It won't be as cute as it was anymore, but and as I said before, I do prefer the female Nidoran evolutions. But our male Nidoran just evolved into Nidorino! Whereas the female Nidoran evolves into Nidorina because, you know, O's are male and A's are female because... By the way, I was wrong before. I thought that he would have evolved his Bulbasaur and his Rattata, but apparently he didn't, so not all his Pokemon are new. So, mistake corrected, sorry. Also, we're getting something new, which wasn't in the original Generation 1, which is why he's walking back to us. This is the Fame Checker, which I don't know what it does from the top of my head, because I mostly don't care, so I will look it up right now. Ah, Bulbapedia, you are my friend. Go there for all your Pokemon information, and I was not paid to say that. Let's see, the Fame Checker, apparently it just contains information about certain trainers in the game. Mostly gym trainers, and for some reason Dipshit's sister is in there along with Professor Oak. Like Bill! Who the fuck is Bill? Well, Dipshit just told us about a person named Bill where we should go because he has information about Pokemon, so I guess we're gonna go there. Fun fact, he's named after Bill Gates. But before we can get there, we have to go over the Nugget Bridge. The Nugget Bridge is sort of a mini challenge where you have to defeat 5 trainers in a row, except you don't really have to defeat them all in a row. You can go back to the Pokémon Center in between battles. But I won't be, and they are sort of a mini challenge, so I will show off every single battle. And for defeating all 5 trainers we can get a nugget. What is a nugget? You cannot get it at McDonald's because it's a golden ball. A golden ball that, just like the star piece, can be sold at the shops for lots of money. And I get the chance to show off Mega Punch, which is a move we learned from a move tutor at the end of the last part, and I gave it to Mascot for whatever reason. Also, I looked up what it does. Apparently it's just a move that deals a fairly high amount of damage, at least for early game. For late game, it's not very useful because one, it's a normal type move which isn't good against anything, and it doesn't have very high accuracy, so there are better moves you can use instead. And the exact same goes for Mega Kick, except it's also a signature move for a certain Pokemon. And being a signature move doesn't really mean anything, it just means that that move is seen as iconic for that certain Pokemon for whatever reason. In most cases it's seen because that Pokemon is either the only one that can learn that move, or the only one that can learn that move naturally by leveling up, so without TM or move tutor. And there are also things that are seen as signature abilities, which is also just moves that are either exclusive or seen as iconic for certain Pokemon. Oh, and I'm reminded of something, because we're fighting a Metapod, and something I should have brought up way back in Viridian Forest. You can catch a Metapod and a Kakuna there, but the only move they will have is Harden, which increases their defense, so they can't really attack. However, they will just have Tackle if you evolve them from a Weedle and a Caterpie. So it's just better to catch those and evolving them as opposed to actually catching the evolved forms. And something else, as sort of a failsafe, when a Pokemon runs out of the PP for every single move it has, it will use the move Struggle automatically, which does damage to the target, but also to the user, so it will just die eventually if it uses the move enough. But if you have to use Struggle in the first place, it probably means that you really fucked up. I mean, maybe with the exception of really early game, you always have plenty of Pokemon with plenty of moves and even PP restores, so you're probably gonna run out of health before you ever run out of PP. PP. So, since I don't have anything to talk about at the moment, let's talk about shiny Pokemon. First, what the hell's a shiny Pokemon? They're rather special, because what they are is that there can be a really small chance that a Pokemon will be a different color. It's not very impressive just being a different color, but just because of how small that chance actually is, it's seen as sort of a special thing. But how small is that chance? 1 in 8,192. So if you ever run into any wild shinies, just catch it. For the love of God, catch it. I'm serious, it's really not a common thing. There are people who, like, in years on years of playing Pokemon, they actually haven't ever seen a shiny. Well, legitimately in the wild at least. There's a certain Pokemon in Gen 2 that will always be shiny because it's supposed to introduce you to the concept of shinies. Generation 2 was the first to have them because Generation 1 didn't really have color, so you wouldn't be able to tell if the Pokemon was a different color. Though they will always have sort of a sparkly effect when you run into them, so you know it's a shiny even if you haven't seen the Pokemon before. And in the recent games they made it a bit easier to run into shinies, but you still have to work for that, so it's still not really a common thing. By the way, we're fighting another trainer with both a Bellsprout and an Oddish, like they're trying to tease you. You like these two Pokemon? Well, you're only gonna get one of them. I think I said before that both their final stages are reached by using a certain item on them. Oddish, on the other hand, also gets another third evolution, so a split path in evolutions, but that's not until Generation 2. And Bellsprout doesn't really get anything. Pokémon Red was more popular anyway. I think we just won the second battle on the Nugget Bridge, so we're gonna be here for a while, and I better find something else to talk about. Eevees! Not Eevee the Pokemon, Eevees like in the letter E and the letter V. But what are they? Well, they stand for effort values, and it's not something you can actually see in game or the game actually really explains. And I'll try to explain this as simple as possible. Eevees are basically invisible points that determine which stats level up more than others. For example, defeating this Sandshrew here would give us a EV in defense, meaning if we beat a whole bunch of Sandshrews we would get a whole bunch of levels up in defense. You don't actually get that stat boost until you level up the Pokemon itself, but that's about as simple as I can explain it. It's not something you really need to know if you're just playing Pokemon through the storyline and don't really compete with others, but it's important for competitive battles, so players can give their Pokemon the maximum potential by only having them defeat certain Pokemon. For example, a Wartortle has a pretty high base stat in defense, so if I want to fully utilize that base stat, I train it on Sandshrews. So that sounds easy enough, right? Well, what makes it a little more complicated is that you can only have a certain amount of EVs. A Pokemon can only have 510 EVs in total and only 255 in one stat. So if you want two certain stats as high as they could possibly be, you make sure that that Pokemon you want to EV train has not been in any battles beforehand. Because if you, for example, defeat a Pokemon that gives you an EV in speed, that means you can no longer put that EV to defense or special defense, for example. So EV training is pretty much to make your Pokemon stronger, but also to make it very specifically stronger. And people never really do it for just beating a Pokemon game, they only do it for like competitive battle and defeating other people. So those are EVs and what you need to do for EV training. Now then, there are also IVs. IVs stand for individual values, and opposed to EVs, which can be manipulated after you've caught the Pokemon, IVs are determined the moment you run into that Pokemon. Now there are certain ways to manipulate IVs in Pokemon you're breeding, but I don't really know exactly how IVs work. So the best way I can describe it is that they're pretty much Pokemon genetics that determine what Pokemon are stronger than others from the moment they were born. But this is a video game, so they weren't born, so from the moment they were randomly generated. So having a Pokemon with the right IVs also makes them stronger. And then there are also Pokemon natures. This list just keeps going on and on. Pokemon natures, just like Pokemon IVs, are determined from the minute you run into them. However, these you can actually view in-game and they're a lot less complicated than IVs are. Pretty much what it is that every single Pokemon can have one of 25 natures that determine which stat is slightly higher and which stat is slightly lower. For example, if your Pokemon has a lonely nature, it means the attack stat is slightly higher, but the defense stat is slightly lower. And just to choose another random one, if your Pokemon has a jolly nature, its speed will be slightly higher and its special attack will be slightly lower. And then there's a total of 25 different natures, all with different combinations. 5 of them actually don't have anything at all. They don't give you any sort of higher stat or lower stat. So let's give an example of training a Pokemon to its maximum potential. Let's just say I want a Mankey with the highest possible attack stat that it could possibly have. First I need to find a Mankey with the right amount of IVs, and once again I'm not too familiar with how IVs work, but I do know that there is a way to calculate them because the game itself never actually tells you the amount of IVs with a few exceptions. But then I also need to find one with the right nature. Lonely, Brave, Adamant and Naughty all give you a boost in attack, and which of those 4 you have determines which of those other stats will be slightly lower. So which one do I choose for this specific Mankey? Well, I know that Mankey doesn't have a very high special attack anyway, so I'm not gonna give it any special attacks, meaning I'm going with Adamant nature. With an Adamant nature the special attack gets decreased, but I'm never gonna use any special attacks anyway. So now we have a Mankey that genetically has the highest possible attack stat. So now all there's left is we need to EV train it. The way you EV train a Pokemon is pretty much by knowing which Pokemon give you the EVs you want. Now the way you find that out is by looking it up on the internet, and let's see, the Pokemon Nidorino gives us 2 EVs in attack, and since we can only have 255 EVs in one stat, we're gonna have to kill about 127 Nidorinos. And now after all that work, we finally have a Mankey with the highest possible attack stat it could possibly have. And there you go folks, that's how you make a Pokemon for competitive battling. Now all there's left to do is to give it the right moveset. Now what moveset you gave it is pretty much different for every Pokemon, and you can give it a whole bunch of different movesets. So I'm not really gonna go on about that. And how convenient, because just as I finish up my story of how to make a competitive Pokemon, we also finished up the Nugget Bridge and finally get our Nugget. But now this guy also seems to offer us a job at Team Rocket, and no thanks. Those outfits are tacky and they use the worst possible Pokemon. Also, they don't seem to take rejection very well, because I just told him no and now he's battling us to change our minds, because that works. But yeah, it seems they use the Nugget Bridge challenge to find the best trainers and recruit them to Team Rocket, which is kind of unbelievable because Team Rocket doesn't have the best trainers. I mean, look at this guy and his Ekans. Ha! Actually, in Generation 1, Ekans was pretty dangerous because it has a move Wrap, which also inflicts the Wrap status effect. Now, Wrap as a status effect isn't very impressive, it just does a little bit of damage each turn and goes away after a while, unlike Poison. But in Generation 1, Wrapped was actually glitched. Because it not only does damage every turn, it also doesn't allow you to use any moves yourself, leaving you pretty much vulnerable for every attack without being able to hit back until it goes away. Though there actually is a different status effect that doesn't allow you to move until it goes away, but one, that one doesn't do damage every single turn, and two, those moves also have very low accuracy. You can't really keep spamming those kinds of moves because they're likely to miss. So that is why in Generation 1 Wrapped was fucked up. Also, if you have the Wrapped status on you, you're not allowed to switch Pokemon until it goes away, and I think that's the same for every generation it's in. I could be wrong about that, and oh look, we defeated that Team Rocket trainer, and now we're gonna fight a completely random trainer in the grass. But of time for this, my Pokemon are dying, and I just wanna catch a certain Pokemon in this little patch of grass over here. And if you're familiar with Pokemon, you're probably gonna think I'm here to catch an Abra, but I'm actually not here to do that, because I won't be using an Abra for this playthrough. Now you might be saying, why? Abra's evolutions are really good and it makes the game a lot easier. Well, I don't want to use an Abra right now, leave me alone. Besides, the final evolution of Abra is a Pokemon that can only be obtained by trading it with someone, and I don't have any friends. So I'm not here to catch an Abra, but I'm sure there are plenty of other Pokémon FireRed playthroughs on the internet that do use an Abra, because again, it's pretty useful if you can get it to evolve. But first you need to evolve it without it learning any attacking moves, then you need to evolve it by trading it with someone, and I don't feel like doing that shit. Actually, there is a different Pokemon later on that I will be using that I'm actually gonna have to train really long until I get it to the right level in order for me to be able to use it. But that's not for like another 12 parts or something. Instead I'm here to catch a Oddish. However, then I remembered something. I still have the no random encounters code on, so now I need a place to edit. Of course, the Pokémon Center. The Pokémon Center is the perfect place to have an edit. And that is why this video is 40 seconds longer than it needs to be. Now I'm going at the Pokémon Center, I might as well heal up my Pokémon because they're still kind of dead. So I am going to walk into the Pokémon Center, heal up my Pokémon, and the moment we're outside again, the no random encounter cheats will be off. By the power of video editing! Oh, the Pokémon Center. You are the perfect place to edit. Did you see that? No? Well, that's why the Poké Center is a perfect place to edit. So now it's time to catch an Oddish, and I make sure that Mascot is in front of my party because it still has Thunder Wave to inflict paralysis, and paralysis makes a Pokemon easier to catch. Actually, all visible status effects make a Pokemon easier to catch, but some of them, like Poison, hurt the Pokemon and you don't want to kill the Pokemon. Now there's also another one that doesn't hurt the Pokemon as the status effect itself, but the only way to inflict it is with a damage dealing move. But here we found an Oddish that will soon be mine. It's little, it's adorable, but above all it's a grass type. It's also a poison type, but that's not important because it's a grass type and the next gym is a water gym which is weak to grass type attacks. There's also one other reason for it later on, but I also just like my party to be a bit bigger, but not with filling it with catching Pokemon I don't really like. And I do really like Oddish, but I mostly like it for the alternate evolution it gets in Generation 2. I love that Pokemon. It's so adorable. Sadly, we can't actually make Oddish that Pokemon because this is technically Generation 1, even though it's actually Generation 3, but sure. You are allowed to evolve Pokemon into Generation 2 Pokemon after beating the Elite Four once, so technically you've already beaten the game at that point, so no. I mean, yes, for filling out the Pokédex, but you can't really use Generation 2 Pokemon throughout the game in your party. But now I'm just getting ahead of myself, because we will be seeing that alternate evolution very late into the playthrough. But I just sort of wish I was able to use it throughout the rest of the playthrough. Even though it's not a very useful Pokemon, it's pretty useless, but I just think it's so adorable. But for now, Oddish will do, in terms of both cuteness and usefulness. So do me a favor and get into that Pokeball. Thank you. We just got a 5th member to our party. There's still room for one more, and Oddish isn't gonna stay in our party for very long. But I just like having it for the time being. Also, I'd like to think I give it a appropriate nickname here. At least as soon as I make up my mind. I selected a P here and I don't exactly remember why. I don't remember what I was gonna name it at first, but now its name is Cannabis. Cannabis the Oddish. Yeah, a fitting nickname. Now from here we can go to the right and there are more trainers to fight, but after that we can visit Bill. But since I'm not gonna show off every single trainer, I'm gonna fight a bunch of them off screen and then come back for the next part. As I do with every trainer route. Besides, our new cannabis needs some grinding. But for now, for like the third time in this video, let's head back to the Pokemon Center. Get a Pokemon healed up, fight some trainers, and I will see you in the next part when we go to Route 25, visit Bill and take on the Cerulean City Gym. See you then.